So welcome to Mex Moves, our weekly podcast on Mexico business and finance. I'm Damian Fraser.
I'm Eduardo Garcia.
Eduardo, this week I think we have a great interview with Juan Manuel Valle, the CEO of Afore Coppel, which by affiliates or users is the largest pension fund in Mexico. He's going to talk about the pension fund industry, Afore Coppel. And before that, what I have this week is something on demographics, how Mexico's getting older, which makes pensions more important naturally. Some interesting fintech news this week. We've got Clip launching a consumer division, raising money from Mastercard and International, the Chinese fintech. We also have FEMSA raising money from QED for a credit business. And then we have something on Trump saying that we're not going to extend USMCA automatically for the next 16 years, but most likely go to a 1-year kind of rolling review scheme. Let's see if that's true or not.
Sounds. I think that's a full plate, Damian. Shall we begin with the demographics? That seems very interesting. Or I'm heading to the World Cup, you know.
Well done to getting tickets. That puts you in the 0.01% of Mexicans. I biked to work this morning. Today is Thursday before Mexico plays South Africa. And I saw almost no cars. So, the government's decision to cancel schools for the day, tell everyone to work from home, has worked from a traffic point of view. And I saw lots of kind of fancy, affluent Mexicans getting into buses on their way onto the stadium from the Polanco Lomas of Chapultepec district where I work and live.
There are two people going to the stadium, the fans and the teachers. We'll see whether we both can make it. As many of our listeners might know, there are protests in Mexico City at that time by teachers who are demanding higher wages, higher pensions, and more influence on how teachers get promoted here. So they've been disrupting traffic, and we'll see if they disrupt the opening game. I hope not.
I hope not for you and for the rest of Mexico.
Correct.
So on that, our Mexican listeners will be very familiar with this. The CNTE, sort of dissident teachers union, has been occupying the main square and trying to sort of block or partially block entry to the football stadium, the Azteca Stadium, as it's commonly known here. And what their core demand, they have a bunch of demands, but their core demand, I think, is for the government to overhaul the 2007 so-called ISSSTE pension reform, which is a reform for public sector workers from a defined benefit pension system to a defined contribution system that they say is less beneficial to public sector workers, including teachers. The government's retort is that would cost 7 trillion pesos or 20% of GDP. There isn't money to finance the overhaul or the cancellation of that reform that's nearly 20 years old. And that reform built on a previous reform to private sector workers back in 1997, where 10 years before that, where also private sector workers moved, for the most part at least, from a defined benefit system to a defined contribution system. The Afores, were born as a result of that reform, because now you put your defined contributions into your Afore account, and you get, if you're subject to that scheme, you get, whatever returns that your contributions have made. And that, I've been seeing Eduardo, the BBC, ESPN, because they're all here in Mexico, keen to write stories about Mexico that are not only about football, writing kind of learned pieces about Mexico's ISSSTE 2007 pension reform, because and going to the Zocalo and interviewing the dissident teachers. So they probably got more publicity than they've ever got before from a global perspective, at least, because Mexico's full of all these journalists writing, about anything they can write about.
Yeah, that was their intent, I assume.
Yeah.
And
So
yeah, go ahead.
no. So I mean, bringing a kind of broader picture to it, what's your take on the underlying changes going on in Mexico's demography that makes pensions such a critical issue, both for public finances and obviously for the people that are going to be retiring or have retired.
Well, that's the key question, Damian. I mean, Mexico has had always, or we have given the impression always that we're a young country with young people, and we still are. But from families having 7 children, Mexican families are now having less than 2. So the defined contribution system was unsustainable. The from a, I guess, from an auditing point of view, so they changed it, and that has generated ripples in many sectors of society. The government, as we have learned from interviews that we've done before in Next Moves, has been trying to compensate the pension that was created in individual contributions so that in the end, there is at least a safety net that allows people to retire with a minimum amount if their Afore does not give them the sufficient resources to reach a certain level. And for that, they have given a universal pension to everyone that reaches 65 years of age. And they have also created a new trust fund that contributes if your pension is below a certain amount. That for the teachers is not enough, apparently. They want to cancel the whole individual contribution system to go to the other system. I don't think that would be a very smart solution. I don't think they can cave in. I don't know if the amount the government says that it would cost the public finances, but it would be unraveling the whole thing. As we live longer in Mexico as everywhere in the world, if you retire at 65 or 55, as the old system had it, there won't be enough resources to pay that pension. Mexico will be downgraded probably 2 notches. It's a very tough position. Now, the president made the mistake of promising to change the 2007 ISTE law in her campaign. And now she's trapped between her words and what the fiscal realities are. And so it's a very entrenched situation. I don't know how they're going to solve it. It's difficult, but I think the demographic of Mexico has changed. We're getting older, we live longer, and there isn't a possibility fiscally to sustain the old system. Maybe they can increase some of the additional benefits for the teachers. They're also demanding higher wages. They've been increased, not as fast as the government might said in real terms, but they have improved. And so it's a very entrenched situation. Let's hope that cool heads remain and that they can reach a solution. It's a very, very complex issue because it's also an electoral issue. The teachers have always been part of voting machines for the parties that are in power. And so that's the complexity of it as well, that they are used or they represent votes for whoever is in power. And that confuses the whole thing, makes it very, very difficult to resolve.
I mean, that's right. I mean, I think pensions are already absorbing a big part of government spending. So I read that about 17% of government spending is now going to pensions, and that's excluding what's spent on PEMICs and CFE and government entities. That's just from basically the universal pension that you talked about for men at 65. I think women is now 63, and then you have this, as you described it, this top up to the Afore and the ISTE system if people's pension is less than the sort of IMSS average wage, which is like 17,000 pesos a month. And then you also have people like me and probably you, Eduardo, that started working before 1997, and we can choose between the legacy defined benefits pension or the Afore, depending on what pension will be higher. So that also is costing money because most people retiring were working before 1997. Therefore, most people are still getting the defined benefit system right now in Mexico. So we have, like many countries, a very complicated pension system. You have the universal pension, you have the legacy pre-1997, you have the Afore system, you have the ISTE system, and then you have this 2024 reform that gives a top up, which is supposedly financed out of a trust, but clearly there isn't enough money in the trust to continue that subsidy. And then on top of that, you have 50% of Mexican workers that are informal and therefore do not get the Afore system or the ISTE system, and they're just getting the universal pension, which isn't really enough to sustain you in old age, even though it's much better than it used to be. So we've got kind of different public policy problems. One, this big increase in government's spending on pensions, and then two, at the same time, got a lot of people, maybe 50% of the workforce, that aren't going to have enough pension. So the root of the problem is, I would say, twofold. One, you need more workers in the formal system that are making contributions to their pension, so that it becomes more viable, their final pension, and the money's being saved to finance that. And secondly, there's a public finance problem because Mexico's tax base and tax revenues are way too low as a percentage of GDP. So people often talk about, Mexico's not very indebted. It's 50% of government debt, public sector debt to GDP, a little bit more now. But it's kind of a slightly misleading figure because you're not really financing your debt out of GDP. You're financing your debt out of public sector revenues. Since public sector revenues in Mexico are half in the OECD average, the equivalent of 50% debt in Mexico is like 100% debt elsewhere. So Mexico's kind of more leveraged than it seems when you factor in how low the tax collection is.
No, and Mexico is not growing, and that's also a problem. I think the solution is what you said about probably bringing in or reducing the informal sector of Mexico. But for that, you need to have a vibrant economy, people really investing here. And this administration is not generating that enthusiasm. And so we saw figures in May of a decline in the number of people registered with the IMSS. So the picture is pretty complex. There are probably solutions, but they're not easy to accomplish. And with the current administration being a little bit more having to voice the interventionist policies, which is fine as long as regulated by the sector, but not the yes. I think not going to be improving fast enough. There is also talk about our fiscal reform. Obviously, we need one. But again, these administrations, the previous administration, we thought would be very honest and not corrupt so that we can trust that our taxes would go to projects that would be well thought and beneficial for the economy. Has not been the case. There is talk about a lot of corruption going on in public offices, so that doesn't encourage anyone to want to pay more taxes. So there are a lot of things that could be done, but they haven't been done correctly.
All true. Now, today, I think Mexico still has time to solve this because fortunately, the working age population in Mexico, people from sort of 15 to 64, let's say, is very high, 67%. So way higher than most other places. So two-thirds of Mexico is working, or the working age population at least. So we still have, even though the demographics are beginning to move, we still have a relatively small pension population relative to total working population. So if the government can fix this, then Mexico will be in a better position than other countries that may have left it too late or a lot later. And to their credit, they, as of today, as of Thursday, June the 11th, early in the morning, they haven't ceded in a material way to the CNTE despite this pressure. So it might have been easy to have given them something, and as you said, it was actually in their campaign to overhaul some of these reforms. Anyway, we'll hear more about it from Juan Manuel There's Valle, the CEO of Afore Coppel, who will go into to more detail. Should we move on to fintechs?
Let's
A
do
lot of
that.
fintech news. Yeah, we haven't talked about fintechs for a while. So it's time we went back to my favorite subject. So Clip, Clip is very well known here in Mexico as a terminal provider, mostly to small mom and pop shops in Mexico. Their terminals are in maybe 500,000 small retail, mostly retail establishments and restaurants and so on. They raised another $500 million. It seems from Mastercard and from International for the most part, and also from TelevisaUnivision through Media for Equity. And they're going to use that money, for the most part at least, to launch a new business, which is MyClip, which is a consumer-based business, different to their existing mostly terminal business. And I think it's going to focus on three things, because I went to the presentation. Very good presentation, by the way. First, digitalizing cash. So letting people turn cash into digital money by using their distribution network with with these 500 stores that have Clip terminals. So you can give your cash and they'll put it into your app. To begin with, it will only be about 28,000 points, but the idea is to grow to 100,000 points. So it'll make it a lot easier to digitalize cash and vice versa. Also take money out of your MyClip app and get cash. Secondly, peer-to-peer transfers without a bank account. So, well, I could send you money, even though you don't have a bank account. It takes a minute or two to download the app. And because it's not a bank, it's a wallet or an IFPE. It's really, really fast, because I did it to open the app and send money between yourself, your friends and family, or people you meet, or whatever it might be. That obviously exists, but the idea is it's going to be a lot quicker and more efficient and less friction with this model. And then three is sort of tap to pay. So every phone becomes a terminal, both for peer-to-peer and for retail establishments. It's interesting that Ant has Alipay, which is the sort of giant payments fintech in China that started off with Alibaba, the e-commerce giant in China. It's a separate company to Alibaba, which is listed and is a private company for now. And they've created a very successful sort of super app in Alipay, whereby you can open up apps within the Alipay app and use the Alipay financial rails to sort of make payments. So instead of, as it were, going to Uber or Didi direct, you could go through Alipay. And the idea is that MyClip will do something similar. They'll launch their own sort of app store and become, they hope, at least a super app. Now, it's not going to be, it is, I think, one of the more significant Chinese investments in Mexico outside the car sector. And cars are mainly, so far, mainly just selling Chinese-made cars in the Mexican market. There's very little actual investment. So China's obviously a big global leader in Fintech, and I think this is one of their, along with Didi, which has, as we talked about, has a financial app, and also invested in another Mexican fintech called R Squared. This is going to be one of the most significant Chinese investments here, and I don't think anyone is, and especially not them, is underestimating the challenges of effectively digitalizing cash in Mexico. It's one of the economies with the highest use of cash for different reasons, but obviously one of the reasons is to evade or avoid taxes. And then you've got a tremendous amount of competition. So you've got the main competition is cash itself, but then you've got digital competition from the news and the platters and all the traditional incumbent banks that are trying to do similar things. And there's tens of millions of debit cards that most people find a reasonably functional way of paying for stuff at stores. So it's not going to be easy to get everyone to be paying with their phone and tapping to pay in an economy that's still very cash orientated. And then if you can do it, there's lots of other people that want the same business. Not least Mercado Pago, which is the fintech arm of Mercado Libre, which is the main competitor of Clip on the terminal side or the merchant acquiring side, and now it's going to also be a major competitor on the consumer side, where up until now Clip hadn't really been present.
Yeah, I would just add, it's quite interesting. Clip, I think it was the first company in Mexico to offer different type of terminals, converting your phone into a terminal. If I recall correctly, when I talked to the CEO and founder Babats many years ago, they were the first ones, I think, and now we have a few more offering the same system. In this case, they're coming, if not late, they're not the first ones into trying to digitalize the Mexican economy more than it has. Obviously, there is greater room to improve. So it's going to be an interesting challenge to see how well they do and what they can offer. I guess they have a certain leg inside already by knowing all these merchants that use Clip to charge with their phones, or they've developed now new terminals that are mobile and all these other thing, but they probably know those customers and they will be tapping on them to get the new product. And we'll have to see how well they do against that competition that you mentioned, the fintech. Also, shall not stay still. One thing that struck me very impressively is valuation. Dollar investment that secured. It's one of Mexico's unicorns. If that's the valuation, well, now with Star X coming to the market at trillions of dollars of money, this seems a little tiny, but still, it's quite significant for the Mexican market.
That's right. I mean, I think we've talked about, it's key for Mexico to digitalize its economy. It's lagged Brazil, Colombia, India, you name it. And so it's a great initiative that they're trying to do this. And competition is obviously good, and if everyone else is trying to do it, it's even better. And they have some advantages. I think trust is key, and Clip is very well known. It's got one of its main investors is Televisa. There's a lot of advertising. They've been around for a long time, and people, if they're going to turn cash into a digital sort of number on their phone, they're going to have to trust the brand, and Clip definitely has that because it's been around and it's got so many customers. So that's something in its advantages. I tried it. I was at a VC event yesterday, Angel Ventures, and I saw a friend who didn't have the app, the MyClip app, and within 2 minutes I was able to send my friend 10 pesos, and they were able to download the app and receive it. So it definitely is very frictionless, and because it's not a bank, it's a lot easier to open the app and put money in it, because the wallet sort of rules are a bit more lax than the bank rules, as they should be. So there's some things in its favor. So moving on, there was another big fintech news, which was FEMSA via its omnipresent retail store OXXO announced a joint venture with QED, the big global fintech VC fund. So FEMSA had been talking about finding a partner in credit for a while. We didn't know whether FEMSA was going to be doing it with a VC fund or whether with a strategic buyer. So that's that riddle has been solved for now. FEMSA is going to own majority control of it, and reading the press release, they said all the things that investors want to hear, which is they're going to move prudently. They're going to watch the data before they stretch their balance sheet. Now, OXXO has kind of moved, I would say, pretty slowly overall on their fintech exposure. They focused first on payments. They lost a fair amount of money. They changed the head of Spin, which is the name of their fintech division, several times. At one point, they were going to be kind of an open architecture sort of fintech. Now it's clearly much more integrated. The plan is for it to be much more integrated within OXXO. and play to their strengths. And I'm assuming that the credit business will be also very linked to the underlying OXXO business rather than a sort of broad credit business that's competing with the likes of Minu or Plato or BBVA for that matter. Now, I heard the now CEO of FEMSA, Jose Antonio, and Fernandez Garza Laguera, and I heard about a white paper event maybe a year or two ago saying that there was no hurry on credit. There's always interest in getting credit in a place like Mexico. So what they wanted to do was to get the customers, and they have those obviously, get the payment side sorted out, and then move finally to credit when you're ready and when you have the data. So they're following a playbook that they did actually announce a couple of years back.
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting call by, like you say, Jose Antonio Gonzalez Garza Laguera. He's a young CEO of the company, and they had even kind of like announced that they were going to suspend spin for a while, Fintech. They had obviously reduced the number of employees they had in that side, on the credit side of the business with the spin Fintech. I think this will give them a partner that has experience in the business, and they will feel more comfortable now that they've made this joint venture with QED to move forward. As you said, they will probably do it slowly, gradually, as they learn, not so that they not stretch their balance sheet too much and risk some losses there. Again, it's another interesting in the technological world. We'll see how well they can do. An interesting thing is that if I'm not wrong, QED also has invested in Mexico in other financial companies like Bitso, the crypto exchange, and has also invested in Kavak, the auto used car fintech company. So they have certain knowledge of Mexico that they will obviously bring to the new venture with FEMSA and in the retail sphere, providing credit through the OXXO chain. So kudos. Let's see what happens. It's a very important decision for this young CEO of the company. Let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and hopefully it'll work for the benefit of the company and its clients.
Yeah, no, QED, I think, is pretty much in every fintech in Mexico. They were one of the original investors in Nubank back in Brazil. As you said, they're in Kavak, they're in Confio, they're in Bitso, they're in Felix Pago, and so on. So they have a lot of know-how. I wonder how all the other fintechs that receive QED feel about QED now teaming up with OXXO, but no doubt there are all the appropriate Chinese walls in place. Yeah, and on QED, they're also in another deal that white paper announced this morning. It's interesting. Betterfly, which is an employee benefits and insurtech platform, bought a similar company, Minu, which is salary on demand, so basically payday payroll loans, short-term payroll loans. Apparently, the deal is being valued at $100 million. I don't know if that's cash or equity. Betterfly is obviously financed in part by QED, and guess what? Minu is also financed by QED, so it presumably has brought them together. And interesting that you're beginning to see this kind of consolidation in the tech space. There's too many of these players. A lot of them received money 2020, 2021 at quite high valuations. So bringing it together presumably gives them scale, helps them amortize customer acquisition costs over more products and amortize operating costs over more revenues. So interesting deal there. We don't know the exact, well, I don't know at least the exact size of Betterfly, but it's raised a lot of money, more than $200 million. And it back in 2022, it was a unicorn, $1 billion in a Series C. So it's clearly, bigger than Minu, and it's got lots of good corporate clients. It's based out of Miami now, but Mexico, I think, is its largest market. It's also in Chile and other places.
Interesting. That was announced early today or yesterday. I hadn't seen that piece of information.
I read it in white paper this morning at 6:25 in the morning, when I tend to read white paper when it comes out. So I guess it was announced this morning.
Cool.
So we had another big investment announcement. Mercado Libre announced $4.6 billion in inverted commas, because it turns out that investment, as they said, to be fair, it also includes operating costs. So basically everything they're going to spend money on is $4.6 billion. But it makes a better number when you're with the president in the morning press conference. If you add capex, so I guess sometime probably next year they'll be adding capex, opex, and future capex and future opex. Why stick to what you're? Well, in some extent, this is future capex because it's 2026, but maybe they'll roll up multiple future years to get an even bigger number. But the actual capex number we don't know. They don't break it down, but if the e-commerce side of Mercado Libre in Mexico is $10 billion or so, it's unlikely that their actual capex is more than $300-400 million, because they're also in that 4.6 billion also throwing in the credit expansion at Mercado Pago. So it's a bit of a meaningless number, but it's assuming that it's compared to a similar number last year, it's up 35%. And what's absolutely clear is how incredible the growth is at Mercado Libre. I was looking at some numbers. I mean, their revenues are now $20 billion. I think they've grown more than tenfold over a 10-year period. So that's a impressive company by any measure, but perhaps unnecessary to twist the numbers in this way to make them look even bigger than they really are.
Yeah, I agree completely. That 4.6 billion sounds very dramatic, very impressive, but actually the capex, I read that it was between $200 and $300 million. Obviously, they gave us the comparison to last year, and there is a 35% increase, but that's because of their operation costs have also risen. It's very impressive also that they were able to tell the president that they were going to hire 8,500 new people to reach a total number of employees of 42,000. So yeah, no, it's an impressive company. They don't need to, like I say, exaggerate the story. The story, it's good enough as it is.
So just to finish, Trump, I think as we expected, said this week that the US wasn't going to kind of renew USMCA for the next 16 years, that we were going to move therefore to a kind of annual review period over the next 10 years. The peso barely budged on the news, and I think more and more people were expecting that we were going to move to an annual review period. B, Trump says lots of things and then changes his mind, and it might be a negotiating tactic, and then tomorrow we wake up and there is a renewal. I'm not saying that's likely, but it's certainly not impossible. He did sort of throw in his normal kind of bombastic, sort of nationalistic and somewhat insulting discourse about how the US didn't need Mexico and didn't need Canada and so on. I think, with inflation now in the US is actually higher than in Mexico. I think if he really sort of cut the US off from Mexico and Canada and other countries for that matter, he would see inflation a lot higher, because Mexico enables the US to produce a lot of products on a cost competitive basis. But we seem more likely than not to be moving to a sort of a multi-annual review process. And probably within that, you're going to get a lot of side agreements per sector. So there'll be a deal on cars, there'll be a deal on agriculture, there'll be a deal on AI, and you name it. So we'll sort of keep USMCA. There'll be a bunch of side agreements that will be mostly sector driven. And meanwhile, it's not good news, not good for investment, but at the same time, companies, plan not just on these treaties, but on the underlying kind of commercial logic of the US and Mexico staying close together, and Mexican exports to the US are growing very, very strongly. So that even with all this uncertainty, we're seeing exports up. In April, exports up over 20% year on year, and Mexico's share of U.S. imports continues to climb.
Correct. I mean, if I were an editor of a newspaper covering, because you have to cover Trump when he says these things, but I would have done what you just did. I mean, I would say Trump says he doesn't care about Mexico and Canada. Markets don't care about him, or something like that. Because like you said, the peso didn't budge. I mean, we listen to this, we have to cover them, but hey, what does it really mean? And yes, he loves to do that. But reality, I think the inflation number in the US was quite significant, above 4%. I mean, it has taken a while for the impact of his tariffs to prove. Maybe the tariff was not what brought inflation to 4%, more the oil impact because of the war on Iran. But here again, these are contradictions that are costing him in his popularity. And so the words he says might not mean, or we cannot take him at face value for sure, at least in terms of the economy. He threatened to bomb Iran again, and I think he's doing it, which is worrisome, but that's another area that is not part of our expertise. So shall we move on to our interview?
Yeah, just quick takes. Really only have one after what we've talked about. FEMSA, the toll road FIBRA priced the follow-on offering this week. They raised about $4.3 billion, maybe $250 million. They had bought a stake in the Salamanca-Leon toll road from Grupo Mexico, taken on some debt mostly with Goldman Sachs to finance that. And they issued equity to pay back Goldman. I think the deal was a good deal for the Afores. There might have been a bit of disappointment that it doesn't seem to have been a lot of international interest. So almost all the deal went to local investors and international investors for now, at least, and not that active when it comes to the FIBRA and the FIBRA equity offerings, maybe because of lack of liquidity. But good news that they were able to raise from the Afores, which as the Afores keep on getting bigger, have more and more money to place in these type of instruments, which pay decent dividends, and Afores are buy and hold investors that don't really care too much about liquidity.
Sounds good. Fair enough. Let's listen to Del Valle.
It's great to have with us today Juan Manuel Valle. How are you, Valle?
Very happy to be here, Damian. Thank you.
Well, thank you for accepting. Juan Manuel is the CEO of Afore Coppel. Afore Coppel is the largest Afore by affiliates. I think they have about 13 million affiliates at the last count. And one of the largest by assets. They have about 630 billion assets, or $35-40 billion. And it's an Afore that is now celebrating its 20th anniversary. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So tell us, Juan Manuel, first of all, in this 20 years, you started, let's say, about 9 years after some of the other Afores, and yet you've become the largest by affiliates and one of the largest by assets under management. How was Afore Coppel able to position itself in this 20-year period?
Well, I will make a brief comment before. So 30 years ago, almost 30 years ago, when the system began, I was invited by a professor I had in school to work in a project that he was going to lead. And he wanted me to help him in presentations and analysis, and also with the school, as a teaching assistant. And I went to an advisor I had at that time, the father of very good friends, who was the dean of ITAM. And he told me that it was a very easy response. What they were going to do was the most transcendental reform in Mexico for the next 50 years. So I was involved in the pension system reform in 1997. So since that time, I have been very engaged, closer or farther from the system, and I know very well the system. So if we move 29 years ahead and we look particularly at Afore Coppel, when the system started, around 20 pension funds were approved by the authorities. And then the peak was when Afore Coppel entered the market. So with Afore Coppel and the other Afores that were authorized that particular year in 2006, there were 26 Afores in the market. No, so after 20 years of being there, it's not only the fact that Afore Coppel grew from 0 to being the largest by number of affiliates, but also the fact that we are only 10. No, technically we are 9 plus a government institution, no, but we are 10 administrators there. And I think the fact that explains the most of the success of Afore Coppel in terms of affiliation is the brand. No, what Coppel represents to the Mexican market is really, really important. And the fact that every single customer that we have today went through one of the 1,700 stores that Coppel has, and that they have been loyal to the brand, and they trusted the brand for administering their money, it talks a lot about the brand. No, that's a very important element. Second, because the start of the process was not easy. No, you had the stores there, you had people that came from another pension fund to run this. And the first months and the first probably years were not easy. People didn't go to affiliate. So they had to learn a lot. And then the ability that Coppel has to transform and to understand not only the customers, but a new market allowed Coppel from some first initial months suffering in getting customers to building a machine that was able in some years to bring 1 million new customers to the pension fund. The majority of them came not from another pension fund. It was not a commercial activity, but a pure registration. People that were not affiliated to any pension fund. And in many cases, still the case today, we register 30% of the registrations in a single year, 35%. You know? So a lot of people that are entering the system enter through us. And some of them, the first month, they have zero balance. But the next bimester, when the Social Security contributions are paid, they receive for the first time. So a lot of people that are entering the labor force, before entering the labor force, or at the same time, they go with us and register with us. No? So I think being there, being close to the people is a very valuable asset. Second, being a brand that has been built, among other things, around trust is a very valuable asset. And the capacity to adapt to a very particular reality and start from scratch and be able to build a very successful institution within the ecosystem that has very large and important players out there, but we were able to thrive even with the competition.
And as the CEO of an Afore, like the CEO, I guess, of any asset manager, you have sort of at least 3 responsibilities, right? One is asset gathering, which is what you talked about a little just now. The other is in managing the assets, the investment returns, and then the third is maybe the P&L of the business, delivering returns to your shareholders. How do you sort of divide your time between those 3 areas?
I will add a fourth one. And particularly, I don't know if it will be the case in any country. Probably in the US, it's not the case, but in Mexico, it's the case. Generating engagement with customers. No, the truth and the main complaint of customers in the pension system in Mexico is that they are approached once to affiliate them, and they are just ignored. It is not as easy as that. No, you cannot be ignored. You have to be involved and you have to ask. But a lot of people don't do that. And we do have a role to play there. And if we go back to who we are, for the majority or for a large proportion of our customers that are base of the pyramid, if we look at the system today, most of them, the best they will be able to get out of the system is the secured pension, as long as they contribute in the formal market 1,000 weeks. We could just affiliate them and let them run. And probably with 40% of contribution rate, a lot of them will end up with 900 weeks. No, we have to do better than that. We have to make it very clear for them that by changing a little bit of their behavior between the formal and the informal market, they could get to the 1,000 weeks and get the secured pension that will make them 3 or 4 times better than by securing only the general pension that we have in Mexico. So that's one group. But then you have the group in the middle, or you have the group that started contributing in 1997, just after the reform. Contributions were 6.5% for many years until 2022. 6.5% is not enough to get a pension that is close to what you were making. If you have a low density, it would be impossible. But even if you have a higher density, like 70% of your time contributing, it will not be enough. So for that group of people, you need to get them engaged so that they understand that by doing voluntary savings, that we still don't do enough, they can get something very close to their wage. No? And then you have the last group, that it's a group that is capped at the 25 UMAS, which is like 90,000 pesos, the maximum level at what companies contribute. If they are making a lot more than 90,000 pesos, they need to understand that the most they will be able to get, because their density is closer to 100, no? If they contribute all the time with the new rates like 10, 11, 15%, they will get something close to their 90,000 pesos. But if they make more, they need to save more. So that part of the job, it's also really important. So I have spent a lot of time also on the financial education, customer engagement part, because we believe it is important. And particularly us, we believe that we have a very important responsibility with the group of people that we are their administrator that are base of the pyramid. No? So going back to your question, so clearly the part of receiving new customers, it's important. Probably I spent 20% of my time there. The administration component, the being an efficient administrator, how we do everything else, both the commercial part and investment, probably another 20%. And the other 60% will be divided between administration, asset management, and this part on engagement, financial education. And probably it will be 25 on the second and 35% on asset management. No, at the end, if we do a very good job in asset management, and if we have a difference between us and the rest of 100 basis points, in the final balance, it's a lot. No, 40 years of contributing the same amount. If the interest rate is, if the return is 5 versus 4, or if it's 11 versus 10, no, it can make 30 or 40% difference in your final balance. No, so that's where we have to spend more time and try to do the best within the investment regime that we have, so that at the end we're able to deliver very important returns. In the final balance of anyone, the returns will be between 55 and 70% of the value. And the main difference there, if it's 55 or 70, will be the returns. No, so it is very, very important what we do on that part.
Do you think it's very important commercially? Do good returns or attractive returns drive asset gathering, like you see in the US and the UK, or do you think that the asset gathering is driven mainly by marketing?
I think today the drive force of asset gathering in Mexico, it's not marketing, it's the commercial forces. I think and not necessarily ours, because we are in our stores, we are not out there. But if you see the data, what you will see is that those that are spending more on their commercial efforts, not necessarily marketing, are the ones gathering more customers from the market. No, if you ask the people, we continuously conduct surveys on what people expect, and it is more the service or a pain situation in the relationship with the administrator, something that they needed and we were not able to deliver, that drives someone to move away from us into another institution. it is not the returns. So with your question, that's completely different from the US. In the US, clearly the driver is returns. And probably a lot has to do with where we are standing in financial education and engagement, and where everyone is standing in the US. No, so people in the US are very engaged with their investments. The US is probably the country where more people have investments in the stock market. They are there. They are engaged. No, here you don't see that. So when you don't have people engaged in investments and in doing things on their own, it is very hard to imagine that in something like this, in this product, that would be the driver. People don't necessarily understand how important that part is, and as of today, it is mostly the commercial efforts that drive the asset gathering.
So in Afore Coppel, you've been much more focused on alternatives, infrastructure, foreign equity than the average Afore. Is that just because your average affiliate is much younger than the average affiliate in the system, so you can take more risk given they have a longer time horizon before they retire? Or does that reflect a sort of underlying philosophy that the average Afore is too conservative?
I think it has more to do with the culture of the company from the beginning. At the end, Afore Coppel is part of a group that was founded by an entrepreneur 82 years ago. You don't necessarily see the same in all the other Afores. No, so that's one element. So what happened? So when Afore Coppel started, if you see the evolution of the investment regime, at the beginning it was only fixed income. So probably if you looked at the CIO of the Afores when the system began, you had people that were moved from the fixed income desk in banks to the pension funds. But then in I don't remember the year, but there was a change, a very important change that allowed pension funds to invest in stocks. And at that time, I think it was 2013, that Afore Coppel did a big bet on investing in the stock market. No, so for many years, Afore Coppel was the leader in the proportion of the assets that were invested in the stock market. It was a small Afore, and that was easier, because if you looked at the larger Afores, given the size of our stock market, it was a lot more complicated. But Afore Coppel entered there. And the other thing that was a differentiator is, even in fixed income, our allocation is a lot more into corporate debt than into government debt. No. And that's culture. The fact that you have a company founded by an entrepreneur, that the family is involved, you look differently other companies. You don't look differently the debt of other companies. You feel comfortable investing with them. No, there's probably more bias on how conservative you are if you have not been an entrepreneur. No, so I think that helped a lot. I arrived 5 years and a half ago. And by the time I arrived, one of the things we looked into was how our portfolio looked versus the market, but particularly how it looked for the next 5 and 10 years. No, how we were going to grow our assets, just normally. The customers we had today, the track record we had on the contributions, the returns, and how it was going to look in 5 and 10 years, and how we expected the financial market in Mexico to look like. And with that in mind, to see whether we were going to be able to continue with the strategy that we had, or we had to do something different. And what we found at that time is that where we had more space to do things, because we were under-allocated, and there were a lot of opportunities, were private markets. No, and given the regulation, the way to maximize private markets was, we were over-allocated Mexico, no, and we could do in private markets 20% of our assets, 90% abroad, 10% in Mexico. No, we look at our model, and part of what was a benefit for us was our demographic bonus, the fact that our customers were on average 10 years younger than the system. No, 10 years, it's a lot. It's a vintage, no, in terms of private markets. So we worked with the advisors we had for the whole portfolio And we decided that we had to go in that direction. So we put together our vehicle listed here, and we started working in identifying how we should build this portfolio in order to maximize the long-term return for our customers. No, and again, the fact that in this ecosystem in Coppel, you have the entrepreneurs involved. It was a lot easier to understand what entering the private markets would mean. No, a lot easier than if you are part of a bank and the decisions are more thinking on how a bank thinks in terms of the risk-reward profile. And if I move fast forward to this year, we have been working with a firm in the US that advises many pension funds in the world. So our new benchmark portfolio that we will have ready mid this year is being built by us with them, with all the experience that they have in pension funds. And when you look into the long-term capital market assumptions, what was very interesting, even from them, is that given the government interest rate in Mexico, not nominal, the real, it is very hard to look away from there. No, so part of, I would say, the course that our portfolios are not as diversified as you will see in other places. It has to do with limited financial market that we have in Mexico that has not grown at the pace that we have grown. But the other is that the premium that the government pays is quite attractive. So the competition versus other asset classes is not easy. No, so probably part of the reason why other pension funds are not where we are now, it's not only demographics, but the fact that government interest rates are really, really attractive.
So the government is very keen for the Afores to finance, apart from its own budget deficit through government bonds, also infrastructure. And the regulators are also quite keen for the Afores to apply sort of ESG, environmental social governance, criteria to their investments. How do you manage the tension between sort of financing the government's goals and Mexico's goals and maximizing returns to your affiliates?
Well, if I go back 10 seconds to the attractiveness of government securities, at the end, there is enough space to make infrastructure very attractive. No, so we have discussed even with the government, particularly under the new law of infrastructure for well-being, these reasonable returns. No, and it seems that no one feels uncomfortable with returns around 16-17% in pesos. No, if I look at my long-term capital market assumptions, I don't imagine government securities in the long term being above 8.5-9%. 16% is 800-900 basis. It is very, very attractive. No, so I think in terms of maximizing the returns, if I do government securities, if you look at my portfolio, that it's probably the portfolio with the largest maturity in fixed income, we have not been able to go beyond 8 years. No, it is hard to build a portfolio that goes beyond 8 years. If we look at infrastructure, it would be 20-year projects at 16% returns. It makes perfect sense. That's why if you look at pension funds in the world, probably there are some that are over-allocated, Australia and Canada, but even in the US, they have an important proportion in infrastructure because of the maturity period. But at the returns, it would make even more sense to participate in that. No, I think that's an area where it is hard to imagine that there would be other players beside pension funds that could provide the resources required and without making any compromise on the returns that at the end are our main mandate towards our affiliates.
Obviously, everyone would love 16-17% returns, but there's quite a lot of government infrastructure projects, Tren Maya, Dos Bocas, that clearly don't achieve returns anywhere like that, maybe not even positive returns in some cases. How do you sort of stop financing bad government projects?
I think there's full clarity there of the kind of projects that where Afores can participate, and in general are projects that are also bankable. No, the government can decide to do many projects that meet other goals. No, we are not into the social development or social impact project per se. We need to have projects that give attractive returns to our customers. But I don't think the government, particularly in those three projects, there was never an interest of having the Afores involved. But in the moment that the government bought the participation of Iberdrola in their projects in Mexico, they turned into us. No? So the same government that it didn't ask for any support on some projects that had other metrics looked into the Afores for that specific project that was energy, that was a stabilized asset. No? So we have insisted the government that as long as they are stabilized assets that we can analyze, they will make sense for everyone. No? And I don't feel that there has been any pushback looking for us into projects that we cannot evaluate, that we cannot see the returns. No, I think they can manage that. And if they need resources for that, they have a very large portfolio of stabilized projects that they could put into a REIT, into a FIBRA, and we can invest there. Because they will be certain, and probably those will not be 16s. Probably those could be 12 or 11 because they are already stabilized. No, I was thinking more on projects that imply development when I said 16. But there could be others that at 12% make perfect sense because they are already stabilized and we will be collecting our dividends every year and there will be a premium over government securities.
Are you comfortable or even enthusiastic about sort of applying the regulators' ESG criteria to investments?
I think that as of today, most of the criteria is we need to have those elements in our analysis and the data is valuable. No, I think that unless not because of what the pension funds ask, but because the regulation for the companies operating in Mexico that is supervised and enforced by someone else than the pension funds, when that happens, then we will have no problem in pushing harder. But it cannot be the pension funds with the regulation that was put for us that will be the driver of an ecosystem, the economy changing. So if you look at the US or if you look at Europe was very hard on the enforcement of the regulation. The US, not necessarily. The pension funds insisted in some areas, but they were not the drivers or those that were making the drastic changes. No, if we look at Mexico, some of that regulation could imply that we could not invest in Pemex. No, why we will not invest in Pemex? If they prohibit Pemex to do that, then they will change and we will invest. As of today, if we invest in Pemex, it's because given the regulation and the returns, it is attractive to invest in Pemex, and we are being transparent of our positions, even in those companies.
So as you mentioned earlier, the regulations on the retirement system, the Afores system, have been modified. First of all, they opened up investment opportunities to equities. Then I think it was in 2020, they increased the contributions, from originally it was 6.5%, and I think in 2030 it's going to go up to 15% of our wages. Do you think that's enough from a regulatory perspective, or do you think we need further reforms, either opening up to additional flexibility when it comes to the investment vehicle or increasing the contributions that people make?
I think as of today, given the life expectancy, the 15% is the right number. No, I don't think today we need to do anything else on that side. I think there are opportunities. The largest challenge in Mexico, given the pension system that we have, is informality. Because all the numbers that I mentioned at the beginning of what people could expect, it's people that even for a while, they spend time in the formal sector. those that spend zero time in the formal sector, even though they could put money into the system, they are not. You can open an individual account being an independent worker. They have access to the system. If they deposit 15%, they could retire with something similar to what they were making. But that's the biggest challenge, informality, because they are not doing that, and they are not enforced to do that, and no one is pushing them into do that. And then you will have a huge difference between those that will end up with a 500, 600, 700 pension, combine the general pension and what they get from the system, from those that will get the general pension, whatever the number is. No, so those informality at retirement will be a lot better than those in informality. And that's not a reform of the pension system. That has to do with more with labor laws and with how the economy is set up. There are opportunities in terms of the pension system. Yes, I think today the most important opportunity is in the deaccumulation moment. No, we have done a lot of things around accumulation. We have not done a lot of things on the accumulation, and we're getting closer to larger groups of population arriving to that moment when they will need to do something with what they have accumulated. And I think there's not a lot of opportunities, and there's a lot of changes that need to happen. If we go to the investment regime, I think a lot of changes have happened. I believe that the last change that was a couple of years ago to allow us to invest more in private markets here in Mexico addresses the challenge that the public markets have not grown enough. No, so if you look at the evolution of the pension system and the many things that were introduced in the investment regime, everything that was introduced allowed the Afores to do things that had an impact. So the FIBRAs, probably the FIBRA regulation shouldn't be more than 12 or 13 years ago that we were allowed to invest in FIBRAs. Now, we have on average probably 5% of the portfolios in FIBRAs. No, so we have been like pushing the regulation for finding new opportunities for doing more things because of how we are growing. So I think that will continuously be changing. There will be a lot more things that we'll be able to do, and we will find more opportunities to do those things. And then finally, on the law per se, I think that there are still things that can be addressed. I think making opt-out voluntary savings will be valuable. So since all the contributions are collected by the Social Security Institute, so the employer pays to the Social Security Institute. So if every year when you get your wage increase, instead of getting the full 4%, you get 3% and 1% goes to the pension fund, making it mandatory for you to do voluntary savings under an opt-out system. Like it happens everywhere in the world with this kind of opt-out systems. 80% will stay, 20% will leave. And I think that would be very good for a lot of people to have voluntary savings. I think that eventually we have to address the challenge for women in terms of how much time they are out of the formal labor force because of things that are not related with their decision only, but because they have to do that given how Mexico works around kids or around elderly, that they spend more time taking care of people, no? And that is harder to reach the 1,000 weeks minimum to secure a pension, etc. I think there has to be a difference there, but I think they are minor. No, I think the most important things are there, and the most important by far was increasing contributions. In 1997, when the reform was made, it was clear that 6.5% was not enough. No, and it took more than 20 years to make that call, because politically it was challenging. Increasing contributions, it was challenging, and it was a very strong government with full control on Congress that could do that, no? And the business community participated actively, and the largest companies understood that there was something that had to be done, thinking of the retirement of people. But it took 20 years or 21 years to introduce the reform. That was by far the most important thing that was missing in the system.
But that said, the increase overall in social security contributions, of which the Afores is probably the biggest part now, contributes to informality because it creates a big arbitrage between the cost of employing someone in the formal sector and the informal sector. So, as you said, roughly half the Mexican workforce at any given moment is in the informal sector, and the pension that they will get, the mandatory sort of state pension, is too low, to live off. You used to work in Hacienda. I mean, what would you do to fix the informality sort of pension problem?
Well, I think informality is a problem because we have not addressed informality. The fact that the pension fund, the contributions are 15% and they are driving people away, it's not because of the contribution. It's because you can be driven away and you can make money living in informality. No, I think that the way to address that is that we should be mandated to use our ID for everything. If you don't have an ID, you cannot do anything. You cannot get phones, you cannot get a bank account, you cannot do anything. And the second thing, to close the loop, and a project that at some point I thought it was fantastic, is eliminate cash in the economy. If we really want to address that problem, we have to do both things. No, you need an ID for everything to have a life, no? And you cannot use cash. Well, you can use cash. You will not fully eliminate cash, but we would not need 1,500 and even probably 200 peso bills to do that. We could live with the 20, the 50, and the 100 pesos, and everything else done via digital means. No.
On income tax, there's a sort of simplified regime, sort of RECIFE for workers that are sort of between the informal and formal sector. Emilio Romano from the ABM talked about in the Cancun ABM event about a sort of simplified social security sort of scheme whereby contributions would be a bit lower for a sort of temporary period. Do you think something, and that could lead to a big increase in contributions and help the pension system for informal workers?
I personally think, and with the data that I had when I worked in government, that the largest group of people that are in the formal economy, under our current law, they will fall below the threshold where they have to pay income tax. So income tax will be free for them, no? You would bring them into the formal economy, no? Well, that will not make a difference in terms of contributions. If you go to Social Security, and the question is, do we have a system that could afford to bring into the equation 20 million more people or 10 million more people as of today? I think the answer is no. So we'll need to spend a lot more resources there. No, I don't think that the numbers add up to be able to do that, to make it simpler and cheaper and to bring 10 million or 15 million more people into the equation. I don't think that works. I think that if we reduce Social Security contributions, the only way to fund it is if we reform the consumption tax. No, if we don't change that, if we don't want to get into that discussion and we don't make it general, the VAT, it is impossible to do anything on the Social Security contribution. I don't say that you cannot do it, but I think that the numbers don't add up by simplifying this without doing anything else.
Last question, Juan Manuel. We started at the beginning with Afore Coppel celebrating its 20 years. Where do you see it over the next 20 years? Very much the same as it is today, or a sort of AI-driven, robotic sort of asset manager?
I think in terms of the institution, as of today, we are the leaders in number of accounts. I hope that in the next 20 years, we become the reference for the system. No, I think the company, the culture, the owners are fully engaged in making that difference in what we do. No, in terms of our investments, I think we will continue with the path that we have followed. We think we can make things different. We built up an investment committee with people that bring very different mindset to the discussion that allows us to continue this path, like the path with private markets, that I think it's fascinating in terms not only of the strategy that we have, but what it can bring into the outcome in terms of returns. And in terms of technology, I would love to see everything that can be applied into our processes applied. No, don't necessarily think that AI-driven investments is what we are going to do on our own. At the end, we do a lot in Mexico, no, and we have a team dedicated to Mexico. And what we do outside Mexico, we do it with the largest players. So if you look at the BlackRocks, the JP Morgans, the Vanguards, etc., all of them are applying AI into their processes, gathering more information, analyzing faster that information. So I think we will end up using a lot of what they are developing because it is highly intensive in capital and in people. No, and our team is a not small team, but it is hard to imagine that we will be using cutting-edge technology for doing that. No, they can afford that. If you look at many of these managers, when I go and I sit down with the analysis team, you have people that spend 3 years doing data analytics in Formula One. That kind of skills, no, it's something that they can bring in the equation, and we can take advantage of that. If we look into administration, into the processes, clearly we will see in the next 3 years everything that can be simplified and make things easier, particularly those things that are repetitive and where you have a large probability of making a mistake that doesn't make sense. That those are processes that don't need to be there. Those have to be driven by AI. And if we look into customer service and advisory to the customers, I think that's where we will see more things in the coming years. No, you have people in general in the industry that need to have high school for becoming and applying to be an asesor previsional. It is very hard that they are able to respond a lot of things that come into the table. They are 25, 26. Probably they don't know anyone that it's already getting the pension. So a lot of things that are closely related with that last part of the process, it is hard to imagine that they can solve it. You need the people, you need the empathy to be there, but you can have a lot of tools, both bringing prompts into the computers, helping them to respond questions or to ask the right questions to the customers and have the right elements in the responses, or even fully applied, fully developed solutions backed by AI for the customer to ask via WhatsApp or via the internet or any other means, and get all the information that it's out there for them to gather. No, I think that's where we will see more things coming.
Juan Manuel, thank you very much for joining Mex Moves. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Damian, for the invitation.
Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the show. Please review us, share us, and we hope to have you back next week.